Have you ever wondered about stolen objects in museums? How museums' objects are organized within their collections? How objects become a part of museum collections? Well then, this is the video for you. Hi, I'm Sydney and this is the Curator and Curator 51 Museum channel. So if you want anything museum related, this is the channel for you. We have museum overviews, museum ASMRs. My last video was my top 10 museums, and even museum job videos. Like this one today. Today we'll be looking at what a collections manager is, or a museum registrar, and what exactly it is that they do for the museum. Previously, we've looked at a museum conservator and a museum curator. But today I thought we'd take a little bit of a deeper dive into museums collections. So if you've ever been to a museum, of course there's a lot of paintings and objects, artifacts from ancient times, modern times, really anything you can find is in a museum. But how do those objects get there, and who's in charge of keeping track of all those objects? As I mentioned in a previous video, about 99% of museum objects are in storage and they're not on display. That means only 1% of the objects are on display. That still means that the museum has to keep track of that. So there are collections managers, assistant collection managers, and museum registrars that are in charge of that. So a collections manager is someone who's in charge of accessioning objects, provenance research, and moving objects within a museum's storage or even within the museum itself. Oftentimes there is a collections manager for a specific wing or department of the museum, but if it's a smaller museum, you might have one collections registrar for all of the objects within the museum. That can still be over thousands of objects. This includes photographs, giant sculptures, paintings. Everything is under the collections registrar or collections manager. For example, larger museums such as the Louvre or the British Museum have a specific wing dedicated to certain periods of history. They have ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Middle East, Oceania, and they might have a designated collections manager for each part of that museum that deals with those specific objects and is an expert in those objects. So the reason I know all this is because I have been trained in collections management, and so I do have a little bit of hands-on experience as to how it works. So first we're going to start off with what is accessioning. I've mentioned accessioning before, and that's basically how an object comes to be a part of the museum. So I'll give you an example. Say you're the National Postal Museum and you have a letter from Queen Elizabeth that you would like accessioned into the museum. Someone donates it to the museum or a gift. So you would take that object, so the letter from Queen Elizabeth, and you would note down anything significant that's on the letter or about what the person said about bringing it in. So if they said it was from their great-great-grandmother, then you would note that in the object form. So once the person that brought it in signs everything away and says, yes, I'm giving this to the museum as a gift, here's my contact information, here's where it came from, then it goes to the collections manager or assistant collections manager or the registrar. Once the registrar gets the form as well as the objects, that means that they have to do some deep research. Sometimes this either means just accessioning into the museum right away, or it means doing more provenance research on the object. Provenance research is very, very important. This basically means that the person has to trace where the letter came from and how far back it goes. Say this envelope was from Jane Doe. It's from Jane Doe's great-grandmother. So basically the collections registrar or manager has to prove and find out that that is for fact. So they sometimes contact the owner of the envelope who brought it in. Certain objects might have a certificate of authenticity of where they came from or proof of purchase, and this is very important. So if they trace the envelope all the way back to Jane Doe's great-great-grandmother, then they might wonder, how did the great-great-grandmother come to this? So they might do more research into who is the great-grandmother. This could be going to libraries and finding out more family history. This could be just researching the name. It could be researching even the artifact itself. The envelope. What kind of paper is the envelope? Where does the postage stamp come from? Is there a return address? Where is the address located? Is it in the UK? Is it international? So basically they're trying to trace where this object came from, or if in fact it is legit, for lack of a better word. Now, this is very important as a lot of objects that come within the museum's collections, they want to make sure that they can trace the provenance as far back as possible. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll always get the information that they hope for or wanted, but it is very important. As I was taught in my class, a lot of professors have said that if you're tracing provenance research and there's a big giant gap in the research between the 1930s and the 1940s, you might want to look a little bit closer at it. This means that the object could have been looted, it could have been sold under duress, it could have been stolen from a museum. There's a lot of things that you have to look at, and that's one of the big indicators if there's a giant gap in provenance research during that time. This is also important for auction houses. If an auction house gets an ancient artifact, they want to make sure that the ancient artifact wasn't stolen from its home country and that it comes to their auction house in a legal way. I find this super interesting, and it also goes a little bit deeper into repatriation, restitution, and decolonization. So for my own thesis, I had to do my own provenance research on 2 indigenous Sami drums. These 2 drums have been lost during the witch burnings of Scandinavia and Europe. The drums were thought to have been given to a museum by the original owner. However, it is a little sketchy and a little fuzzy on those details of whether it was stolen from the owner and taken from the owner, or if the owner gave it to the museum. Most likely, because of the history surrounding the drums, it was taken from its rightful rightful owner. Now, this drum had been given to a museum in Denmark, but that museum had burned down. So they again thought these drums were lost. But in fact, these drums had been sent to a museum in Paris, and so this is where I started my provenance research. I went to the museum in Paris and I asked them about their collections and if they had seen this drum within their collections. They told me that they did not have that drum and they in fact gave it to a different museum. So here's where the provenance research really begins. So I went to the other museum. I said, due to my previous provenance research on this object for my dissertation, I was told that these drums were within your collections. Is there a way that I could see them and research them for my dissertation, or do you have any pictures of them that I could use? They said, no, we don't have these drums, but this museum might have them. So I have to search for that museum's collections. So this is how provenance research works. It means either going to the museums physically and asking them. It means emailing them and asking if they have these objects. So it's very important to trace the provenance, as it can prove whether or not something was given to a museum rightfully and if they have the right to have it within their museum, or if it was looted during a time under duress. But I am happy to report that I did in fact find these 2 lost drums. Well, when I last checked, they were currently on display at a museum in Sweden, but I don't know where they are at this very moment. But this just goes to show how important provenance research is. These drums were previously thought to be lost, and now they are currently found in Sweden. And it traces their journey all the way from Scandinavia through Paris back to Sweden. You might have also heard provenance research when it comes to the Elgin marbles, for example, of the British Museum. That is a very hot topic within the museum world, as these were marbles that were taken from Greece and they were put in the British Museum, and now Greece wants them back, but the British Museum wants to keep them. I'm not here to say which is right, which is wrong. I'm just here to say to do your own provenance research and your own research. Go to different sources and research different artifacts that you find in your own museum and a local museum. You could research artifacts that are in antique stores or at auction houses. Really, whatever you find interesting and you want to learn more about, just do provenance research on it. A lot of records are public, a lot of records can be found within the library, or if you're doing student research, you can ask the museum itself if you can look at some of their collections. Some museums will allow you to, and some museums might not. It just depends, again, on the museum. This is why it's important to do your research. I feel like that should be the slogan of this channel. But in doing provenance research, there's important things to look for and to get started in provenance research. For example, a museum that I currently volunteer for, I tag their photographic archive. This means that whatever photograph that I'm shown, I have to note what is in the photograph, and that makes it easier for researchers like you or like me to find photographs and objects that might help me in my research. So say I have a photograph of a bird. It would be my job to say, okay, this is this specific type of bird. I see a tree in the background, and I can find out what kind of tree is that. And maybe there's information that was given on the object form from when it was accessioned as to where exactly the bird is, what year it is, what date it is, how old the bird is, how old this picture is. So it really is very important to have a collections manager or registrar within your museum. It also helps keep track of loans or gifts or donations that are given to the museum, this meaning as in artifacts. And they can also help locals with their own research. Certain museums have a local library or a local research center, and it has information just on what's around the surrounding area or the town or village or city that it's located in. For example, the York Library has an archive of local history and general history for York. This can be very helpful when you're researching what land your house was on. Are there any Roman graves there? As, again, there's a lot of history to be found in the UK and the EU. So to make a long story short, a collections registrar and manager is in charge of accessioning. So again, accessioning is getting an object into the museum. And again, as I said with conservation, it is often writing directly on the object or noting somewhere on a label on the object that this belongs to this museum. Again, the way you would do that is, for example, if we're talking about the British Museum, it could say BM.2026.1. That means that that was the first object accessioned at 2026 for the British Museum. This can also help in provenance research, as if there's multiple labels on the object of what year and what number artifact that it is that was accessioned for that year, it can help you trace where the object has gone each year and help with your provenance research. And again, what is provenance research? Provenance research is tracing an object's history and where it has been of its whole life, from the minute it was dug up to the minute it was placed in a museum. Sometimes this can be super easy, and sometimes it can be very hard. And always keep in mind, be mindful of objects that have a gap between the 1930s and the 1940s. Speaking of, my videos might be posted a little bit more sporadically during the summer, as I am taking part of a program in Italy that focuses on provenance research, actually, and collections management. Wi-Fi can be a little spotty, so some videos might come through, some might not. So it might be a little bit until I post one again on a Sunday. But in the meantime, if you're looking for a book to read, as of course we do book reviews on this channel, I'm about to read this book, The Rape of Europa by Lynn H. Nicholas. And this is a book that talks about what happened to the artifacts, objects, paintings during World War II. So this is, for example, the looting of the Louvre during World War II, and how they use provenance research to find these objects, and what they do when some of these objects have been found and they have to be returned to their rightful owners. So I'm really excited to read this book, and I'll let you know how it is, and I'll give it a review, of course, once I finish it. So thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with all my museum adventures. I will be going to more museums in the future, and very soon, of course. And I'll be giving overviews, museum ASMRs, and really anything else in between. If you have any museum recommendations, any museum questions, you can ask a question below. I do museum Q&As as well as my previous museum Q&A. And of course, I'm open to any book recommendations that you may have. So once again, this was Curiouser and Curiouser51 on YouTube and Instagram. Instagram videos and posts are sporadically throughout the week, and YouTube is updated every Sunday, unless my Wi-Fi is spotty. But here's to making museums less intimidating, one visit at a time and one video at a time. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.